Welcome to Alert to Action, and we're here with Rick Bogle on Alert to Action, and I wanted to say that some things happen in this world that we don't understand, and one of those things that has happened lately is that in Madison there are some monkeys at a zoo, and they've now decided that they're going to essentially take the monkeys and use them for all sorts of invasive experiments, do experiments on their brains and stuff like that. And little kids are up there looking at the monkeys, and they have no idea that this stuff's going to happen. Rick Bogle's here to explain to us what needs to be done in Madison and what you can do to help the stuff in Madison. I welcome you, Rick.
Thanks, I'm glad to be here.
Okay. And why don't we talk about your background? Where did you come from?
I've lived for the past 20 years in the state of Oregon. I've been a middle school teacher there for about the past 8 years. This year I moved. I'm on a year's leave of absence. My wife recently had a death in the family, so we moved back to this area. This is where family's from, and so I'm here with her while she's teaching, and so I'm taking a year off.
Now, what's happening in Madison in the way of the monkeys? What's going on at the Vilas enclosure and stuff like that?
Well, the Henry Vilas Zoo is a county zoo. It's owned and operated by Dane County. In about 1963, when the Wisconsin Regional Primate Research Center, that's part of the University of Wisconsin, was built, part of the money was used to build a monkey house at the zoo. Okay. And in that monkey house now, there's 3 macaque colonies. Macaques are a type of monkey, a family of monkeys. Okay. There's 2 rhesus macaque colonies and a stump-tailed macaque colony. Those monkeys, it was discovered about 9 months ago that the university had repeatedly broken an agreement that they had with the zoo. They had agreed that they would not be using any of the monkeys that were raised or kept at the zoo in any sort of laboratory experiments at the primate center's labs. What happened was someone who is fairly intimate with the monkeys there, who knows them all by name, sees them regularly, recognized that some of them started missing, and at first wasn't saying anything, and finally their conscience apparently got the better of them, and so they started asking questions. They spoke to another person who was sympathetic, and between them and other people inside the primate center, some records came to light and were sort of secreted out and given to an animal rights group in Madison that would be the Alliance for Animals. And those records demonstrated that in well over 100 cases, monkeys had been taken out and used in these sorts of invasive procedures. Most of them have died.
What is an invasive procedure?
An invasive procedure would be any sort of experimentation that would harm an animal. We could argue whether giving it an infectious disease is an invasive study, or certainly operating on its brain would be invasive, or operating on it in any way, installing electronics equipment in its body, installing any sort of measuring devices or catheters in its various organs and things would certainly be invasive procedures.
Now would compression experiments be considered invasive, where they take a monkey's head and take like a steam pump and punch it into the brain? Would that be considered invasive?
The intent of the agreement had been that monkeys wouldn't be harmed, and we could talk about the definitions of a term. All of those terms fit in, all of those ideas fit into a larger body of ideas that fit into the idea of vivisection. Okay. Vivisection is experimentation on live animals.
Okay.
The root is viva, as in vivo, living sorts of organisms. So the idea was that they would not be allowed to do those sorts of procedures, that they wouldn't be allowed to harm zoo monkeys. Right. Zoos have a standing sort of tenet that animals that are raised and kept at a zoo won't be used in biomedical experimentation or research. And that's just, that way when you go to the zoo, you know that you're not standing there watching a baby, whatever it is, and know that tomorrow they're going to come and take it to a laboratory and hurt it. And so that's been the sort of the standing rule at zoos across the United States. Then it was discovered that the university was doing this. When that came to light, the National Institutes of Health, which is a federal agency that funds the monkeys, funds the primate research center there in Madison, cut the funding for the zoo monkeys. And so their fate immediately became questionable. People weren't sure what was supposed to, or what was going to happen with them. The lease agreement had gone until 2002. And so the university, when this came to light, they had said, we will not be renewing the lease with the county. So the people in Madison had thought that we had until that date to find some sort of options for them.
Right.
Then here, November 19th, I believe it was, the university announced that as of February 3rd, I think, that they were no longer going to be caring for the monkeys at all.
So essentially on that date, they ended their care agreement on the monkeys because of the U.S. government decided not to fund any more research. So the university said there's no more money coming in, so why don't we just kick the monkeys out of where they are because we can't pay for them.
Essentially that's the case. And so the university started looking around for some sort of home for them, some sort of options for them. And what came to light was both of the rhesus colonies, they decided that they would give to another one of the 7 primate research centers. They would give to the center in Louisiana. That's called the Tulane Regional Primate Research Center. Sometimes it's also called Delta.
Why don't we talk about Delta? What does Delta do?
Every one of the primate centers has some sort of specialty area. They all are involved in a variety of studies. They're all involved right now in simian immunovirus studies, something akin to HIV studies. But Tulane's specialty is infectious tropical disease and parasitic disease. So they're studying things like leprosy and Lyme disease, malaria, a number of tropical diseases that are very, very obscure.
Right.
They also are doing a lot of things with SIV research, simian immunovirus. They haven't been able to cause any animal other than humans to get HIV.
Okay.
So some researchers around the country are looking at retroviruses in other species of animals and thinking that if they could figure something out about that, maybe it would have some sort of lead to some sort of knowledge for human AIDS. In fact, there's many scientists that are saying that it's a waste of time and that we're just spinning our wheels, and we need to be spending that money studying
other places.
Studying humans. We need to be studying AIDS and HIV rather than
AIDS patients.
That's right. Another thing that is going on right now in Tulane is that's sort of frightening is that they're taking the I don't know if you know how a virus is made, but it has a protein sheath, and inside that protein sheath there's a strand of messenger RNA.
Right.
Well, what they're doing now is they're taking the protein sheath from HIV, they're taking a strand of the RNA from SIV and putting it in that protein sheath. So now what they've done is they've built a brand new retrovirus. This retrovirus,
a super virus.
Now, I don't know about super, but it certainly is. It's very deadly when you inject it into any monkey. The rate of onset of disease is quite rapid, and it's generally quickly fatal. They don't talk about how serious it would be if it were given to a human or if it were to get out into the human population. But all 7 of the centers are basically, in my estimation, are sort of science gone mad. They've given people these animals and said, here's a chemistry set, and just try to do any damn thing you want to with them and see what happens.
That's kind of scary, considering that we're on the verge of everybody becoming like everybody else in the way of cloning experiments, supposedly. And now we've got them making super viruses that, if they got out, could kill half the human population, essentially.
With viruses, one of the things that keeps them in check is modes of transmission. And as far as I'm aware, there's nothing in these new, they call them SHIVs, simian human immunoviruses. And there's nothing that I've read that indicates that these viruses would be any more readily transmitted between individuals than HIV or SIV are. So I don't think it would be. It would still be a sexually transmitted disease. So I don't think it's, I don't think it's like if it gets out, it's going to sweep across the,
Right.
and it still is going to kill you if you get
Yeah.
it, probably.
Right.
So anyway, so what happened was, on short notice, the university said that unless we hear some sort of offer to try to fund the monkeys, they're gone as of February 3rd or something. The county got involved. There was a lot of articles in the paper. People were calling the the Dane County superintendent or supervisors, and so sort of as an effort to, I don't know, to make peace with the county, the university said, okay, we'll give you an extra month. During this time, we were afraid that they were going to take them away at any moment. So we were doing a zoo watch. There was around-the-clock sort of observation of the monkeys at the zoo, just keeping our eye on them. And now, what's happened is Tom Stobig, one of the Dane County supervisors, has he's introduced a resolution in the county government that says that Dane County should look for some sort of options for the monkeys that don't include sending them to some sort of biomedical laboratories. Right. That resolution went first to the Zoo Commission, and it passed unanimously. After the Zoo Commission, it went to the Public Works Commission, and it passed again unanimously. After it went to the Public Works Commission last night, it went to the Ways and Means Committee, and again it passed unanimously. So it does look like that there's some sort of a will on the part of the county supervisors to try to find some sort of more sort of a safe and caring home for the monkeys rather than a research facility.
Wow.
Than a biomedical research facility.
Well, it sounds like that's a positive. Now,
it's not a sure deal yet, though. I mean, the
Okay.
deadline right now, the way it currently stands, is that we have till March 1st, I believe, or March 2nd.
Now, then will the county fund it, or what'll happen?
We weren't sure. Money was the big issue for a while. And about a week ago, after, you have to understand that in the Madison papers, this is almost a daily article in the papers now about the university and the county and the animal people and the community people arguing over what should be best and what should happen. The university has now made an offer to the county that if the county will accept responsibility for them and ownership, that the university will fund their care for the rest of the calendar year. So, so if the county accepts that offer, then that gives us a 10-month window to find some sort of options. There's already been a sanctuary in San Antonio that's offered to take one of the rhesus colonies.
Oh, good.
They would need some money to help build they don't have anything there for them yet, but they do have some acreage that they said we would be willing to build a facility for them. They would be vasectomized, the males would, and they would be allowed to live out their life, and the colony would come to an end. The other rhesus colony, we're not too sure what happens with them yet. There's talks right now between the United States State Department and the government of Thailand about moving the stump-tailed monkeys back to Thailand. That's not clear whether that's going to transpire or not. There's
why are they taking them back to Thailand?
Thailand is the native home of stump-tailed macaques. Stump-tailed macaques currently are on the Appendix 2 list, this Appendix 2 list of CITES, the Convention on, International Trade of Endangered Species. Yeah. That means that they're a threatened species. Researchers who have been working with stump-tails now for a number of years now believe that they should be placed on the Appendix 1 list, that they really are they're a threatened or an endangered species, right? Because of that, there's a little bit more concern about stumps than there is about rhesus. The stumps, there's some fairly old members of the troop, and there's some question about whether they would be up to the trip. Because all three of these rhesus colonies, macaque colonies, each one independently is one of the three largest and oldest macaque colonies on exhibit in the world. So each one of them is a unique resource for any sort of community observation or even scientific observation. There's been a number of studies done by a primatologist named Franz de Waal, who's written a number of books about the behavior and the societies of all three of these colonies of monkeys. I don't know what's going to happen. I think that there's a high probability that the county will find some way to fund maybe the stump colony and allow it to stay here. I don't know that. I think there's a good chance that maybe one of the rhesus colonies could go to San Antonio. The other one, if we have 10 months, maybe we could find a viable option for it. It is important to know that at the same time that all of these committee meetings have been meeting, the Primate Center staff have been repeatedly coming to the committee meetings and lobbying for the monkeys to be sent to Tulane. There have been a number of citizens that have attended all the meetings and have been asking and pleading with the county to find some sort of options for them other than right. Biomedical research. But the Primate Center staff has been very consistent in their demands, or at least their suggestions, that the monkeys be sent to Tulane.
Wow. So essentially, instead of looking at the fact that these monkeys have been there, well, is it 30 years or something?
Over 30 years now.
So
63 is when the facility was begun.
So they're older than myself, because I'm not even that close to that age. I'm 32 years old, so I'm not even close to that age.
I think the oldest one of the stumps is 34, 35.
He's older than me.
It's a she.
She's older than me, yeah. She's getting up there in age. And they want to take these, essentially these individuals, and I consider them individuals, they want to take these individuals and rip them out of their home and put them at Tulane, which means that, now let's talk about how are these animals caged differently than they would be in a traditional colony? What is the difference between the way that they're taken care of in a biomedical colony versus this type of colony? Do you have any idea about that, or?
Yeah, the animals the rhesus that go to Tulane, the ones that are of breeding age will be placed in a fairly nice setting. They'll be put in a quarter-acre enclosure and allowed to basically live semi-free. They'll be fed, they'll be provisioned, and as long as they continue to have babies, they'll be allowed to stay in that breeding facility, that breeding colony.
Okay.
The ones that are underage will be, it's likely that they would be quickly assigned to some sort of experimental protocols. They would be assigned to somebody's lab. When you're put in a lab, a monkey is either going to be housed, generally, it's going to be housed maybe in paired caging with one other monkey, depending on what's done with it. If there's something that would interfere, that one monkey might be able to take something out of another monkey, then they would be caged individually. So they would go from a group sort of setting to some sort of solitary confinement. Tulane just instituted a plan to increase their infant harvest by 150 infants a year. That's an increase. I don't know what the total infant harvest
right.
is, and that's the terms they use, infant harvest.
So these aren't, they really don't consider these animals. They consider like grain or something, or
they
corn.
consider them animals, but to them animals mean that they're this, it's the difference between me and an animal is the same as between me and the cup. And they recognize that they're biological systems and that they're animate, and
right.
and that there are similarities to us. There's biochemical, biomechanical similarities to us, but what they don't want to address is cognitive and emotional similarity. They don't want to talk about is the monkey, how stressed is it, how depressed does it become, and all of those things are well documented. We know all of that stuff happens.
Harry Harlow.
Harry Harlow is a prime example. Those sorts of studies continue today, not quite to the extent that Harlow did, but there's still studies going on that are looking at when they take infant monkeys from their mothers from the breeding colonies, they place them in what's called a nursery. A nursery is just cages with either one or two baby monkeys in a cage, and what they've discovered is that is that infants that are nursery reared tend to have impaired cognitive ability, slower reflexes, they're less interested in their environment, and they have compromised immune systems. That's the general way that infant monkeys are raised in one of the primate research centers, which means that all of the research that's being done is being done on animals with compromised immune systems and that are in some way impaired.
So these monkeys are they cognitive creatures? Are they able, so essentially by being raised this way, they don't have all the brain function that they would have if they were raised with a mother.
That's right.
So it's actually a very abnormal situation.
They're abnormal. That's right. They're causing them to develop abnormally.
Right, and then we're going to believe
that the research that's done on them has some sort of bearing on humans.
Which are raised with mothers. Humans are raised with mothers. The monkeys are not.
The dissimilarity is it's interesting. It sort of there's cognitive and emotional similarities, and there certainly are biomechanical, biochemical similarities, but the dissimilarities are such that when they study SIV, there's or simian immunoviruses. You can take one strain of SIV and give it to say a rhesus macaque, and that macaque may get sick and die. You can give that same virus to a pig-tailed macaque or a crab-eating macaque, and it may have no effect at all. So even between two very closely related species of monkeys, what they learn on one species may not apply to its closest phylogenetic kin.
Right.
So now when we go from that species of monkey and try to extrapolate to humans, it becomes meaningless.
Well, it becomes miles, doesn't it? Instead of inches, we're talking miles of difference.
And apparently, even the inch makes all the difference in the world. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, now what can people do if they're interested in helping with this? Yeah.
Well, on the smaller issue of the 150 monkeys that are in Madison right now, the most important thing that they could do would be to contact Kathleen Falk she's the county executive for Dane County, and very politely ask her to encourage the county to accept the university's offer. They could also call or write other county supervisors and ask them to also, to accept the university's offer. That's about the level of community involvement that's possible right now.
Mm-hmm.
On the larger issue of just primate research or invasive primate research, primate vivisection, there's a lot of books that people could read. There's a lot of ways they could educate themselves.
Now, what is the ape army? Why don't you tell me a little bit about the ape army and why you're collecting little monkey dolls?
When I was teaching middle school, I had a self-contained 6th grade classroom for years, and we always talked about things like the Holocaust and slavery and those issues of power over another. And my students asked me repeatedly, whenever we would talk about these subjects through the years, they'd say, "Mr. Bogle, why did people let those things go on? Why did people let Jews get taken away? Why did people let the blacks get, put in chains and whipped?" They didn't understand that stuff. Neither do I, but kids see themselves as heroes, and they always knew, and as we talked about this, we learned that there were people that did have people hidden in their basements who risked their lives to help others. And kids are heroes. They see themselves as heroes, and they always have, well, I'd have been one of those people. And I think that most of the people that I've talked to over the past year believe that if they would have been living in Nazi Germany during those times, they would have had somebody hidden in their basement. We like to believe that about ourselves. Well, what happened is I didn't really know very much about primate research, but I did know a lot about primate behavior and primate cognition and research into language acquisition, teaching chimpanzees and gorillas sign language and orangutans and that. And
Roger Felt's work.
Roger Fouts' work, and I've had an interest in that sort of thing for years. I was at a conference and I heard a woman speak, a veterinarian named Dr. Sherry Speed, who's with the In Defense of Animals. Anyway, she talked about a place in Oregon, which was just a couple hours away from where I was living, where there were thousands of monkeys that were being used in these crazy experiments, and I hadn't known about it. Or if I had known about it, somehow it hadn't registered with me. And I was appalled. And knowing what I did about the ability of monkeys to communicate with each other, about apes to communicate with humans, it struck me so strongly that what's going on in those places seems akin to the sorts of things that we have done to others throughout human history. Anybody that was in our power, whatever minority we've tried to harm. It seems to me that the same thing is going on today with primates. And so I was getting ready to take a year's leave of absence, and I thought, you know, before I leave Oregon, I need to do some sort of favor for Oregon, and I decided that I would do sort of a Gandhian thing, and I would go sit in front of this facility, and I decided I'd sit in front of it for 150 hours. And so it turns out basically, it's almost 150 hours. I sat in front of it for 9 days, from 5 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night. In fact, I set up a tent there, and I lived there for 24 hours a day for 9 days.
Wow.
And then I found out in the process of doing research about the sort of research they were doing there, I discovered that this place wasn't unique, that in fact there was one in Seattle, Washington. And since I was leaving the Northwest, I said, gosh, you know, if I'm going to do this crazy thing, and I had hundreds of people stop. And I said I'd better go do it in Seattle as well. So a month later, I went to Seattle and I sat there for 150 hours in front of their door.
Wow.
And said I have lots of literature about this. And what happened is that people that couldn't go with me,
right,
or couldn't stay there, they said, how can I help? And I said, I don't know, give me a little stuffed monkey. And so that little stuffed monkey, those monkeys became the ape army. And
how many monkeys do you have so far?
well over 200. I don't know. There's a couple big giant plastic bags full of them, you know. So what happened was we were moving to the Wisconsin area, and then I found out that, well, we're moving to Madison, and it's the home of Harry Harlow. And I went, oh, God, there's another one of the primate centers there. And so if I'm going to do this in Portland and Seattle, I might as well do it when I get to Wisconsin. And so after that, I was taking a year off, and I found out there were 7 of these places. And so every month I went to a new one and sat in front of their gate for about 9 days.
Now, you got in trouble for one of them. I guess you were
Davis,
arrested.
California.
Yeah. What happened?
I was at every other one of the places I went to. I was able to sit. And either across the street. When I was in Washington, I sat on campus. When I was here in Wisconsin, I sat right against the building. I was, you know, on campus. Well, I got to California and met with the officials there, which I've always done. I'm very polite, and it's not
right,
confrontational at all. I just want to be able to
right,
share information with people that are passing by. And they said, okay, well, you can be there across the street, which is actually an orchard. You could be
right,
across the street from the gate from 8 o'clock in the morning till 5 in the afternoon. And I said, by 8 o'clock in the morning, everybody's already gone to work. The people that are going to be driving by and see me, they won't even know I'm there. And if I have to leave before 5, actually it was 8 to 4, excuse me. If I have to leave by 4 o'clock, then they'll go home and they won't even know I was there. And I said, you know, this is a fundamental First Amendment right. I have a right to express my opinion on this, and if you don't let me express my opinion, you know, it's one thing to be able to speak out, it's another to speak out in front of people.
Right.
And so you know, I mean, anybody can go talk in their shower.
Right.
First Amendment says you can speak in public. Right. And so I said, that's not acceptable. And they said, if you show up other than those hours, first I said, why? And they said, well, it's a public health risk. If you're there, public safety, that cars driving by in the dark won't see you and you might get hit. And I said, okay, how about if I put reflectors along the edge of the road?
Why not? Yeah.
That made sense to me. And they said, no, that won't be enough. I said, how about if I wear a reflective suit? No, you can't be there. And that's when I realized that it wasn't about public safety at all. It was about trying to shield me from everybody else. And I said, well, we all have to do what we have to do. And The other places I've been to around the country, this has not been an issue, and I don't believe that the Constitution changes from state to state. And I'll be there at 5.
Right.
I'll be there at 5 o'clock in the morning. And they said, if you're there, you'll be arrested. So I went, and they arrested me. They talked to me for a while, tried to run me off, and about 5:30 they took me to jail. I got out at about 11:30, and they had told me right before they let me out that if I went back for the next 7 days, that I'd be arrested again. So as soon as I got out, I went and had a burrito, and I went back.
Got yourself something to eat.
Got something to eat. I went and sat back down in my chair, and they arrested me again. And I was there for about 5 minutes the second time. They came storming over, about 6 or 7 policemen, and handcuffed me and took me off. And
like it takes 7 people, so but
I
we won't even get into that.
I don't know. I was, the second time they arrested me, they put me in a wrist lock and all this kind of stuff, and I'm saying, why do you think I'm not going to run away? I mean, what's the big deal? So they took me to jail. They put me in solitary confinement for 4 days, and I was in jail for a total of 6 days until I finally bailed out. I didn't eat. So, I'm vegan, so there was nothing for me to eat, and they refused to, give me food. And I said, fine. Then they started feeling like they ought to try to find something to feed me, and I said, nah. At this point, I'm just continuing the protest, And so that was that. So now I have a trial date. I have to go back and stand trial for trespassing. They could put me in jail for up to 2 years.
Trespassing at where? Now, this was a public university,
University of California. Yeah, Davis.
Right. Now, here in our state,
right,
you're allowed
to be on a
to
public,
be on a public, no matter what state you're from.
When I was in
because in our state,
when I was
that's
in
what we
Washington,
yeah.
and when I was in Washington, another state school, we were allowed to be in the buildings. We could be in the school buildings, in the hallways, as long as we didn't try to go in the doors and interrupt the free flow of business. Well, in Davis, California, in the University of California system, apparently you can't even be on the property if they don't want you to. It still seemed to me that it was a state-supported school. The issue is now in the courts, so there's a number of people that have run up against this same sort of thing. When the state of California decides that you're a nuisance and they would prefer not to have you be saying these things in public, they arrest you.
Now, in Madison, were there violations of the original agreement that they had with the zoo?
The agreement wasn't signed until 1989.
Okay, and what was the original agreement?
Well, the original agreement was just that the facility would be there and run by, in 1963, the original lease was just that they would use the facility and take care of it, and there was no say about how they would use the monkeys. There was a group, some individuals, some citizens found out what was going on. I guess consciousness was rising all over the United States at the time, and so some actions took place, some demonstrations and things, and so the university signed an agreement with the zoo in 1989 that said, okay, we won't do this anymore. We won't use baby monkeys. We won't take them out. We'll find something else to do with them. We'll find some other way rather than take these guys in and torture them. And so that was the agreement set in place in 1989, and at least once other was redrafted, was acknowledged that agreement was still in place. So apparently since that time there have been well over 100 monkeys have come out and over the years, and sold to other labs, used in a variety of studies. Most of them are dead now.
Wow. Now, a part of this controversy deals with herpes B. Now, I guess there was a huge article in Madison about herpes B, and I suppose we should enlighten people about what is herpes B.
Herpes B is a herpes virus similar to herpes simplex that humans get. Herpes B it's ubiquitous in macaque populations in the wild. They think that in the wild macaques have incidence of between 20 and 30%. In captive situations, the incidence runs up maybe to 70 or 80%. Herpes B is deadly if a human contracts it, but doesn't have much effect on a monkey, on the monkeys that it infects. Since herpes B was discovered, there have been herpes B was isolated, I'm going to guess back in the 50s sometime. I don't know exactly when that date was. But since that time, there have been only 40 documented cases of herpes B in humans. Every one of the cases has involved a laboratory worker who's had very up close, hands-on contact with the monkey.
So human beings should not have contact with these monkeys? Is that what you're saying, that these monkeys are really physically dangerous to humans?
It's hard to say. I would say that that's probably not the case. I think that it would be prudent in some sort of public facility that people not have contact with those monkeys. Right. On the other hand, there's never been a case of herpes B in humans that was contracted from a pet macaque. And there's pet macaques all over the United States. People have pet monkeys. Mm-hmm. Nobody that has a pet monkey has ever gotten herpes B, and there's certainly contact.
What about in the original country where they're from?
India.
Aren't these monkeys allowed to run around wherever they want,
right,
and do whatever they want?
Right. Rhesus macaques are called the urban monkey, and in India, they're everywhere. They in the southern parts of the country anyway. I guess in Bombay and Delhi, the pictures I've seen is. They're on the street corner. They're on the lamp posts. They're,
and people don't die
like
there.
Pigeons. They're like pigeons. And
people don't die there from this?
As far as I know, there's been no cases of herpes B. The only 40 documented cases have been with people in primate laboratories.
And the main reason for that is because of the collection of the incidence is higher because they collect them in a smaller amount of space, or what goes on with that?
Probably, since the incidence is higher in the population of monkeys because all of the monkeys are housed in a small area together, so that they have a chance to transmit it to and from each other. But as far as humans getting it, it's difficult to say why it's only shown up in those settings. It must have something to do with stress. We know that herpes in humans is more readily apparent with someone that's under stress. And so it's not surprising that monkeys that are having things done to them that are frightened all the time are under greater stress, so that they may be shedding virus at a greater rate than, say, a zoo monkey would. Right now the feeling is, as long as people stand back a few feet from the monkeys, that they're probably just fine.
Which they are set away from the monkeys at the Vilas Zoo.
The primate center, though, when this word came out about the woman dying down in Atlanta at Yerkes, they went to the Zoo Commission and did a presentation.
Have you ever been to Yerkes?
I've been to all 7 of the regional primate centers. I was sitting in front of the Yerkes gate when the girl died.
Oh my God!
I was there at the time.
That must have been freaky.
Well, it raised a lot of media stuff, you know, and Yerkes had tried to keep it hidden. Emory University is where Yerkes is at. Okay. And Emory had tried to keep the whole situation
out of the media.
Out of the media, and then they certainly had kept her illness out of the media, and then when she died, they didn't have any choice then, and there was this guy sitting in front of the place saying that maybe we shouldn't be doing any of this research in the first place, and it just became a media circus.
Well, that sounds like fun. Well, so essentially you've been to all 7 of them.
I have.
Which one has the worst record? Which one is the worst?
That you're asking, was Dachau a little bit worse than Auschwitz? You know, at some level, they're all so hideous. If you were a monkey living at any one of those, it would be difficult for any one of those monkeys to say, you know, I'd rather be at Wisconsin than Tulane, or I'd rather be in Davis than Seattle. That's not the way it is.
At least in Wisconsin, I get a window, you know.
Actually, they don't. At Wisconsin, if you go to the primate center here, you'll see that the main building is just a monolithic structure with no windows at all.
It has no windows at all?
It has skylights in the hallways for the people, but the outside, all of the sides of the buildings and the ends, there's no windows at all after you leave the entrance.
That's kind of scary.
6 or 8. It's like 6. They don't want people to see what's going on inside.
Well, now, if these procedures are supposed to be so good for our health and everything else, shouldn't we be allowed to see what happens in here, or what happens in those places? Or are the experiments so terrible that we shouldn't be allowed in there? What do you think of animal research? What is your thought on that whole issue beyond what we've been talking about? I mean,
right.
using other animals and stuff.
Well, I think that there's a, for me, it's cut and dry on primates.
Yeah.
There's no question at all. What's being done to them is akin to what was done in Nazi Germany. As we move along a phylogenetic continuum, say what's under monkeys as far as, and that's misleading to state it that way, but I think everybody has to find that sort of that line for themselves. For me, I know where the line is, but for most people, I don't think that they would be as concerned about an earthworm being harmed as they would a dog or as they would a monkey. And so where that line is, it's hard to say.
Right.
One thing that's important to know is that there's a growing number of scientists and medical doctors that are saying that almost all of the animal-based research that they see is bogus. So there's two things going on. There's the ethical question about whether we even have the right to torture other beings.
Right.
And if we even assume that we do have the right, what if it's not doing anything at all?
Right.
Do we then have the right to continue moving along with these worthless sorts of activities?
Now, do you know about the Medical College of Wisconsin?
Not a thing.
Okay.
I do have a friend who used to teach anesthesiology at the medical school in Madison.
Yeah.
And he's now a very active anti-animal experimentation activist.
See, my sister worked in some of the labs at the Medical College of Wisconsin. And most people do not know is that it's got one of the largest colonies of primates in the state of Wisconsin. Most
Do you know
people
how
have
many?
no idea. Between 17 to 80, somewhere in there.
Right.
Because she said that she worked with
Primate Center in Madison has about 1,300.
1,300.
Yeah, and it's one of the smaller facilities.
That's a lot.
Tulane right now, their own monkeys, they have about 4,500. They have another maybe 1,000, 1,500 that are boarding from the University of Wisconsin.
So essentially, if something happened, like an earthquake or something like that, these monkeys that have these viruses and that have been injected with these viruses would essentially populate our regular population. I mean, they literally be running all over the place.
Well, I don't know that they would live in a cold climate. I think they would die out pretty quickly because they need to be provisioned. They're not wild animals anymore. They've been totally taken care of. They don't know how to forage in the wild. But they would, if there have been, in fact, in New England and Oregon, maybe California, I might be wrong on that one, but at a number of these facilities there have been escapes. People have come by, neighborhood people, and say, you know, a few years ago we had monkeys running everywhere around here. So it's not that unusual for there to be some sort of escape, and usually those escapes probably take place out of their breeding colonies. They probably take place out of the outdoor enclosures rather than, I think once you're moved into a lab, the chance of escape is pretty, I don't think you leave the lab. Once you're moved in, I don't think you move out, except for the incinerator.
So essentially, after they're done with the monkeys, they don't let them live out their life.
Normally they would be what is considered, they would be humanely euthanized.
Which means
It means that they're going to kill them and then put them in an incinerator and burn them up.
Yeah, see,
Generally.
At the Humane Society of Milwaukee, that's what they told us. They said, and I don't say anything more about the Humane Society of Milwaukee, but they told us that not to tell people that they were going to die. It's humane euthanization.
Right.
And this little girl called up one day and she said, is my dog going to die? And I said, no, your dog's just going to disappear. And she said, what do you mean disappear? And I said, well, it's just going to disappear because...
Unwanted pets is a really tough situation, you know, because there's so many hundreds and thousands and maybe millions of animals a year that are left without homes, and the shelters only have room and resources for so many. So what do you do?
So are you a protector of insects? I heard that you're a big protector of insects or something like that.
Yeah.
Or
I think that you shouldn't go out of your way to harm any other being. I think that if I don't know that a spider has a mind.
Right.
But I also don't know that it doesn't.
Right.
And I suppose if I'm going to gamble one way or the other, I just as lief be on the safe side. There's no reason to assume that
That's right.
there's, he doesn't matter, I just go back to picking my nose now or something. It just I mean, why go out of your way to harm something?
Right. There you go.
I don't see a reason.
Well, also, it's kind of against the way of nature. Nature actually, in some ways, doesn't agree with direct killing.
I don't know. Nature seems pretty cruel to me. I don't know of very many animals that don't. Chimpanzees in the wild catch monkeys and eat them.
See, I didn't know that.
Wolves catch deer. Bears eat rat. I mean, everybody eats each other. I think I don't think that means, though, because you beat not that you do, but let's suppose that you beat your wife. That doesn't mean I now should have the right to go home or that I should choose to go home and beat my wife. And so just because some other animals live an existence where they're consuming others or harming others doesn't mean that one of the reasons that people say that humans are supposed to be different is that we're supposed to be able to make rational decisions about our choices. Well, it seems to me a legitimate rational choice is to be compassionate rather than to be abusive.
Okay, well, I thank Rick Bogle for coming here, and this was Alert to Action. You have a good night, and I ask that you get in contact with people in Madison and help save the Vilas Zoo monkeys.
Year's leave of absence. My wife recently had a death in the family, so we moved back to this area. This is where her family's from, and so I'm here with her while she's teaching, and so I'm taking a year off.
Now, what's happening in Madison in the way of the monkeys? What's going on at the Vilas enclosure and stuff like that?
Well, the Henry Vilas Zoo is a county zoo. It's owned and operated by Dane County. In about 1963, when the Wisconsin Regional Primate Research Center, that's part of the University of Wisconsin, was built. Part of the money was used to build a monkey house at the zoo. Okay. And in that monkey house now, there's 3 macaque colonies. Macaques are a type of monkey, a family of monkeys. Okay. There's 2 rhesus macaque colonies and a stump-tailed macaque colony. Those monkeys, it was discovered about 9 months ago that the university had repeatedly broken an agreement that they had with the zoo. They had agreed that they would not be using any of the monkeys that were raised or kept at the zoo in any sort of laboratory experiments at the primate center's labs. What happened was someone who is fairly intimate with the monkeys there, who knows
Welcome to Alert to Action, and we're here with Rick Bogle on Alert to Action, and I wanted to say that some things happen in this world that we don't understand, and one of those things that has happened lately is that in Madison there are some monkeys at a zoo, and they've now decided that they're going to essentially take the monkeys and use them for all sorts of invasive experiments, do experiments on their brains and stuff like that. And little kids are up there looking at the monkeys, and they have no idea that this stuff's going to happen. Rick Bogle's here to explain to us what needs to be done in Madison and what you can do to help the stuff in Madison. I welcome you, Rick.
Thanks, I'm glad to be here.
Okay. And why don't we talk about your background? Where did you come from?
I've lived for the past 20 years in the state of Oregon. I've been a middle school teacher there for about the past 8 years. This year I moved. I'm going to
take like a steam pump and punch it into the brain. Would that be considered invasive?
The intent of the agreement had been that monkeys wouldn't be harmed, and we could talk about the definitions of a term. All of those terms fit in, all of those ideas fit into a larger body of ideas that fit into the idea of vivisection. Okay. Vivisection is experimentation on live animals. Okay. The root is viva, as in vivo, living sorts of organisms. So the idea was that they would not be allowed to do those sorts of procedures, that they wouldn't be allowed to harm zoo monkeys. Right. Zoos have a standing sort of tenet that animals that are raised and kept at a zoo won't be used in biomedical experimentation or research. And that's just, that way when you go to the zoo, you know that you're not standing there watching a baby, whatever it is, and know that tomorrow they're going to come and take it to a laboratory and hurt it. And so that's been the sort of the standing rule at zoos across the United States. Then it was discovered that the university was doing this. When that came to light, the National Institutes of Health, which is a federal agency that funds the monkeys, funds the primates, them all by name, sees them regularly, recognized that some of them started missing, and at first wasn't saying anything, and finally their conscience apparently got the better of them, and so they started asking questions. They spoke to another person who was sympathetic, and between them and other people inside the primate center, some records came to light and were sort of secreted out and given to an animal rights group in Madison that would be the Alliance for Animals. And those records demonstrated that in well over 100 cases, monkeys had been taken out and used in these sorts of invasive procedures. Most of them have died.
What is an invasive procedure?
An invasive procedure would be any sort of experimentation that would harm an animal. We could argue whether giving it an infectious disease is an invasive study, or certainly operating on its brain would be invasive, or operating on it in any way, installing electronics equipment in its body, installing any sort of measuring devices or catheters in its various organs and things would certainly be invasive procedures.
Now would compression experiments be considered invasive, where they take a monkey's head and...
Research center there in Madison. cut the funding for the zoo monkeys. And so their fate immediately became questionable. People weren't sure what was supposed to, or what was going to happen with them. The lease agreement had gone until 2002. And so the university, when this came to light, they had said, we will not be renewing the lease with the county. So the people in Madison had thought that we had until that date to find some sort of options for them.
Right.
Then here, November 19th, I believe it was, the university announced that as of February 3rd, I think, that they were no longer going to be caring for the monkeys at all.
So essentially on that date, they ended their care agreement on the monkeys because of the U.S. government decided not to fund any more research. So the university said there's no more money coming in, so why don't we just kick the monkeys out of where they are, because we can't pay for them.
Essentially, that's the case. And so the university started looking around for some sort of home for them, some sort of options for them. And what came to light was both of the rhesus colonies, they decided that they would give to another one of the 7 primate